Morris. From the studios of KPFK Pacifica Radio in Los Angeles, this is Uprising, and I'm Sonali Kohatkar. It's Wednesday, June 10th, 2015. The LAPD Police Commission rules that one of the officers involved in last summer's fatal shooting of Ezell Ford acted, quote, out of policy. We'll bring you a report from yesterday's contentious meeting. And we'll hear the latest commentary from Mumia Abu Jamal as he continues to struggle with medical conditions in prison. Plus, Bichlbaum and Mike Bonano are out with their third film, The Yes Men Are Revolting. They'll join us in studio. That's coming up after the news. Joining us now to analyze today's headlines is Courtney Morris, an assistant professor of African American and Women's Studies at Penn State University. Hi, Courtney.
Hi, Sonali.
GOP presidential hopeful Jeb Bush is in Europe this week, making the case to prospective voters that he has a grasp of foreign policy issues. But rather than sounding combative like his unpopular brother George W. Bush's words seem closer to, like his unpopular brother George W., that is, Bush's words seem closer to Obama's measured sounding but equally heavy-handed rhetoric. In a 30-minute speech in Berlin, he revived the role that his father, George H.W. Bush, played in the reunification of East and West Germany, but was silent on GW's wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. George W. Bush was particularly disliked in Europe. The former Florida governor also took aim at Russian President Vladimir Putin, calling him a bully, but mentioned that it was important not to isolate Putin and push him closer to China. The Washington Post is now referring to Bush as, quote, the nominal frontrunner for the 2016 GOP nomination in an extremely crowded field of candidates. Well, Courtney, what do you make of Jeb Bush's attempt to sound more like Obama, whether intentional or not, in matters of foreign policy?
Well, I think it reflects some important changes in terms of the domestic response to U.S. foreign policy, which is that in the United States, the public is becoming increasingly exhausted by our foreign policy of war without end. And I think this, policy of constant militarized intervention, it really isn't working and in fact is producing the kinds of blowback and conflict escalation that we're seeing unfold in Iraq and Syria and Libya. And so it's interesting, there was a study released by the Pew Center last year, and 56% of the people that they surveyed across the board were unilaterally opposed to extensive intervention in Ukraine. So it's really not an option that is viable, and it's one that's deeply unpopular, and I think Jeb Bush knows that.
And then a 23-year-old Georgia woman was just taken into custody after having an abortion and charged with murder. Kenlissa Jones, who is African American, was arrested over the weekend when a hospital social worker called the police. The worker said Jones told her she had taken abortion pills that she ordered online in order to terminate her pregnancy after she and her boyfriend broke up. Jones reportedly aborted the fetus while driving to the hospital. It's not yet known how far along she was in her pregnancy, although this did not deter AP from referring to her abortion using the terms labor and delivery, implying that a fully viable baby was born. Jones is the third woman in recent years charged with murder for having an abortion after Purvi Patel and Bebe Shwai in Indiana. Shwai ended up having all her charges dropped while Patel is serving a 20-year sentence. Meanwhile, in Texas, a Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals just upheld that state's harsh anti-abortion law that requires admitting privileges at clinics offering reproductive services. The crushing decision made by all of George W. Bush's appointees could lead to almost all clinics in Texas to be shut down. Well, Courtney, do you see links between these two stories? And we should mention, of course, that Kenlissa Jones is the third woman of color to be charged in this way.
Absolutely, these stories are linked, and I think the fact that many of the people who you are seeing being targeted for these crimes of equating abortion with murder, that they're women of color, is not an incident. It speaks to a much larger pattern. Dorothy Roberts talks about this in her very important work, Killing the Black Body, Reproductive Freedom in the United States, and where we see women of color's bodies being treated as though they are public property that needs to be regulated by the state. And so, they really are canaries in the coal mine when it comes to thinking about the state of reproductive justice in this country. But obviously, all of these stories are linked in terms of, how they reveal how effective the far right has been in their strategy of slowly dismantling and whittling away at women's reproductive rights in this country. They know they can't overturn Roe v. Wade, so they've taken this strategy of a piecemeal approach to systematically making it more difficult for women, particularly poor women and women of color, to access spaces where they can exercise their reproductive rights. So these are very troubling stories and very disconcerting in terms of thinking about where we're moving with reproductive rights in this country.
And finally, more news on misogyny, this time spewing out of the mouth of a Nobel Prize winner. 72-year-old biochemist Tim Hunt, speaking to an audience at the World Conference of Science Journalists in South Korea, said this about mixed-gender laboratories. The, quote, trouble with girls working in laboratories is that, quote, you fall in love with them, they fall in love with you, and when you criticize them, they cry. Hunt has issued the typical apology that PR firms advise, saying he was, quote, really, really sorry I caused any offense. Not sorry that he actually said something offensive. Shockingly, he maintains that working with, quote, girls is still disruptive. Well, Courtney, I'm not sure why he's actually working with girls. Perhaps he means women. I've worked in the sciences and I've met this breed of misogynist many times. You're also in academia, and I'm guessing that this sort of woman hating is not surprising to you either.
Unfortunately, no. I mean, it's shocking that in 2015 we're still talking about women in the sciences as though they're, sexy distractions in the lab. Clearly this guy seems never to have heard of Rosalind Franklin, whose work allowed us to understand the molecular structure of DNA, or Marie Curie, whose work on radioactivity is still central to the practice of modern medicine and scientific research. I mean, I think in many ways his comments reflect the fact that women in the sciences not only have to contend with being seen as, lacking the capacity to do this kind of work, but still have to justify their presence in spaces of knowledge production when they're seen as part of the problem, when in fact the real problem is the sexism that keeps women out of the sciences. So it's shocking. I guess anybody can get a Nobel Prize these days.
Courtney, thanks as always for joining us. We'll talk to you again next week.
Bye, Sonali.
Courtney Morris is an assistant professor of African American and Women's Studies at Penn State University. This is Uprising. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Uprising. I'm Sonali Kohatkar. Just 2 days after Michael Brown was killed by Officer Darren Wilson in Ferguson, Missouri, 25-year-old Ezell Ford was shot in South Los Angeles by LAPD officers. Ford had been diagnosed with mental illness, including bipolar disorder and schizophrenia. Police say a struggle ensued when he was confronted and then shot 3 times. While LAPD Chief Charlie Beck maintains that the 2 officers involved, Charlton Wampler and Antonio Villegas, acted appropriately, LA Inspector General Alex Bustamante disagreed, but only slightly. Yesterday, at a spirited meeting, the LAPD Police Commission met to accept public comment before convening for a closed-door session. The commission ruled after a 3-hour meeting that one of the officers, as yet unknown which one, acted, quote, out of policy in his tactics, drawing of weapon, use of non-lethal force, and use of deadly force. The second officer acted only out of policy in the drawing of his weapon. The LAPD has so far killed the highest number of people this year of any department in the nation. Protesting Mayor Eric Garcetti's inaction on the issue of police brutality, Black Lives Matter LA has been camping in front of his house since Sunday, and they took a break to attend the commission meeting yesterday. Today, we present a report to you from that meeting on the story of Ezell Ford, which has not received nearly enough national media attention. I was initially not allowed into the actual room where the commission meeting was held because of the crowd, so I found myself in an overflow room where a group of people watched the proceedings on TV screens. We saw a young activist named Evan Bunch toss a bunch of comment cards into the air in anger while speaking to the commissioners. Minutes later, I saw him in person in the hallway and asked him if I could interview him outside later on, and he agreed. But then soon afterwards, a crowd gathered outside, and it turned out Bunch had been arrested. I followed with my camera and captured footage of him on the ground under arrest. Here is my report from yesterday's commission meeting of Bunch's comments, his arrest, and also interviews with an LAPD spokesman, a member of Black Lives Matter, comments from the public to the commission, and the attorney representing the Ford family. Evan Bunch is throwing his comment cards to the commission in the room where public comment is happening right now.
You are numb to the killing of a human being, number one, which means now you're like Hitler. It's sort of full fixation. True. You're just happy to see folks dead. Happy to see black life dead. Oh, goodbye, 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 goodbye. Why is he on the ground? Why is he on the ground?
And here is Evan Bunch on the ground being arrested with 3 police officers surrounding him and his friends angry, watching it all happen.
Why is he on the ground? Get him off the ground! I see this shit. It doesn't matter. Get him off the ground! You should know why. You got him on the floor. Get him off the floor.
Evan Bunch is lifted by the back of his arms. He is facing the ground and is dragged by 2 officers. He is grimacing in pain, and he's dragged downstairs back into the building by 2 officers while the crowds chant.
That's not right.
Commander Andrew Smith, the commanding officer of Media Relations and Community Affairs for Los Angeles Police Department.
And why was the young man who was arrested just put in cuffs and dragged away?
Well, as you know, we have 2 meeting rooms here. There's the commission reading room, and then there's an overflow room because of the crowd. Everybody's getting the opportunity to speak. The commission and the chief and the inspector general are listening to people speak, and people have the opportunity to come forward and do that. We ask them to stay out of the hallways of the police facility because there's business being conducted here. This particular individual was running back and forth in the hallway of the police headquarters here, refused to go into the meeting rooms, refused to go into one of the rooms to listen to the proceedings that are going on. So the officers asked him to leave the building. He refused to do that, basically ran away and dodged our officers for a while until they were able to take him into custody. Right now he's being detained for investigation. He's not been arrested yet. They're looking to see exactly what happened inside of there, and they're going to determine whether he's going to be arrested or not.
It doesn't seem to be very good PR for the cops to do this, for LAPD to do this at a time like this, on a day like this, when there's a meeting about police treatment of Black Americans.
Well, that's a good opinion. You're welcome to it. However, at what point do we allow people to run in the hallways of the police headquarters facility? We welcome everybody in this building. We welcome everybody to listen to what other people are saying. But when you're disturbing what's going on in the police headquarters, at some point the police have to say, "Hold on a minute. Would you please leave? Go into one of the meeting rooms." And when the individual refuses to do that, we don't have an option but to ask him to leave the building.
So he was detained for running.
He was detained for disturbing the peace inside of the headquarters facility.
My name is Dawn, D-A-W-N, Modkins, M-O-D-K-I-N-S.
And you're with Black Lives Matter?
I am.
Why are you here today?
I came to sit in on the LAPD commission hearings, trying to understand why they're trying to hold hearings behind closed doors when it comes to making decisions about murderous police here in LA.
And what do you think needs to happen? I mean, the police commission has not often gone against Charlie Beck's recommendations, but even when they have, Beck has usually not listened to them.
I think they should hold those officers accountable, and if Beck does not hold those officers accountable, then I think that Mayor Eric Garcetti should hold him accountable.
Have you been in front of the mayor's house?
I have been.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about that occupation?
It was interesting. We got there Sunday morning at about 5:30 a.m. We came to give him a wake-up call, LA wake-up call. And we got there, and about maybe an hour after we were there, he snuck out the back door. He left his wife and his daughter and snuck out of the back door.
So can you tell us how long? Are you planning on going back there after the commission meeting today?
Maybe. We'll see.
And you might stay there until you feel like justice has been served?
Maybe. We'll see. We'll do whatever we have to do to make sure that officers, not only here in LA, in Long Beach, where they, where Long Beach PD are murdering police, and Pasadena, where they're murdering police, and across the nation. I mean, there's some key things that we think might help this. If folks are held accountable, like Chief Beck, right? If Mayor Eric Garcetti doesn't handle him, then we can consider taking him out of office, right? We want Beck. He needs to be fired if he's not holding his folks accountable. The other thing is these commission hearings need to be held in open spaces, not behind doors to make these decisions, right? And lastly, in Chicago, just about 2 or 3 weeks ago, Chicago established reparations for families who have been killed by police, right? So that's another demand that we're asking for today. So if we don't get those things, we will camp out wherever we need to raise enough attention and awareness until they feel like they want to make some better decisions.
I don't understand what you're doing. Make that make sense. And these statements you guys keep saying, like, oh, they're excuses. What are excuses? Excuses are weak-ass statements. Are you weak people? Did you hire weak people? Well, then they all have weak-ass statements for why they're killing unarmed black people. Our lives matter. They seriously matter. And if you don't understand that, then you shouldn't be in this business. It's not for you.
Joshua Kahanana, and I'm here as an agent.
They're wasting your time. I'm not going to give you more time.
I would love to listen to them all day, actually. And, you know, I've been out there marching with them side by side. And you know what? They're worth way more than this entire panel combined. Because you know what? We've lost all faith in you guys. None of us believe that you're going to decide, you know, in the favor of Ezell Ford and Bichlbaum Ford. We don't believe that.
The people in our community is tired. The protect and the serve is off the police cars. I asked Chief Beck the first day he came into service, was he gonna put protect and serve back on the cars? He looked at me like he's looking at me now. Strange. Our kids is dying. The people is dying. People is have warrant strikes. Y'all gave them strikes so they can't speak. People want to speak for themselves. They want to live in a community where they ain't got to worry about getting killed. We put send our kids outside. Kids don't even go outside no more because we scared our kids is going to get killed. Not by us because we can't whoop them, but by cops who can beat them and kill them. So we don't think it's fair that you sit up there and judge us as we get beat, killed, and buried. Our kids deserve an education. They deserve to be productive citizens in life. And if y'all not letting them behind taking that off the police cars, we need that back. We need a new police chief. We're asking that Chief Beck resign since he could not answer the question to protect and serve, go back on the cars.
My name is Stephen A. Lerman, Lerman. I am a civil lawyer employed by the family of Ezell Ford Jr. to prosecute a wrongful death case in federal court for the wrongful death of Ezell Ford Jr. in August of 2014.
So what does the family hope will happen today from the commission result of the commission meeting?
The family, like myself, does not have a sense of optimism. We've already got an indication of what Chief Beck is going to do to find that the shooting of Ezell Ford was justified. It was not only not justified, it was a homicide with evil intent. These officers should be better served by going to federal prison for the violation of Ezell Ford's civil rights.
So at some point there is a case that's actually a trial that's going to begin later this year?
A trial is scheduled for September 1st, 2015, right down here at the federal courthouse.
And what does the family want? What would justice mean for the Ford family?
The justice that the Ford family wants is that the truth be told under oath in a court of law. That's what they want. They're looking for justice in court, not from these police commissioners.
So are they looking specifically for any charges? They want the officers behind bars fired?
I think the family would be satisfied if the officers are disciplined severely, that they would lose their jobs, and perhaps that the Federal Civil Rights Office in Washington would undertake an investigation of them, and if there's a criminal violation of civil rights, that they be incarcerated, and that would be suitable.
So you were involved in representing Rodney King many, many years ago, and this is a moment that's similar all these years later with the Black Lives Matter movement. Do you see any similarities? Can you compare the two eras?
I really can't compare them in a sense that one's completely different than the other. It seems a continuum of sorts is still taking place. And with the rash of shootings of unarmed black and Latino men in this last year or so across the country, it certainly is not a good thing. Obviously, people cannot get along. And so my concern is that maybe in 2 generations from now, this won't be a problem. But it's a big problem now, and it's not getting better.
Thank you so much. Steve Lerman is the attorney being retained by Ezell Ford's family. He was also representing Rodney King in 1992, and he was among several folks that I spoke with yesterday at the police commission hearing that took place before their closed session meeting to determine what happened the day that Ezell Ford was killed by 2 LAPD officers last August. Ford was killed 2 days after Mike Brown was killed in Ferguson, Missouri. This is Uprising. We turn now to political prisoner and award-winning journalist Mumia Abu Jamal. Abu Jamal has been struggling with medical problems for the past several weeks. In and out of the hospital, he's dealing with a number of severe chronic conditions, including open wounds across his body, extreme fatigue. Additionally, he's lost an extraordinary amount of weight, 80 pounds. He is back in the prison system now, relatively stabilized, but not out of danger. Prison radio tells us that, quote, he is weak, in a wheelchair, and his legs are wrapped in bandages. Mumia's independent doctors have still not been allowed to examine him or directly manage his treatment. His condition remains serious, undiagnosed, and untreated, end of quote. Supporters have accused the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections of attempting to execute Mumia Abu Jamal through medical neglect. And despite his medical conditions, he filed this commentary about the recent political debate over the NSA and the congressional fight to pass the USA Freedom Act.
NSA, anyway. Since the disaster of 9/11, the so-called Patriot Act, one of the most misnamed laws in recent memory, given its content, has been an obscenity burrowing through the Constitution like a boll weevil through cotton. The Patriot Act was perhaps the most unpatriotic law in modern history, for it was based on fear, not reason, as perhaps best exemplified in the words of Michigan's veteran, Senator John Conyers, who told a broadcast audience on a BET news program, back when BET had news programs, that he signed the act without reading it, saying, "We were scared." The law gave a treasure trove of snooping powers to federal agencies to look everywhere, lest terrorists lurked. It strengthened immeasurably a new branch of government, the national security state. And government, empowered by the law, turns its lenses, mics, and attention to its central subject, you. Since the 70s, the era of the Vietnam War, the peace movement, the civil rights and black liberation movements, the women's movement and student movements, the government waged secret war against American citizens, including figures like Martin Luther King, comedian Dick Gregory, the Black Panthers, and beyond. They committed crimes vast and small, including murder. Remember Chicago's Panther leader Fred Hampton, killed in his very bed. The Patriot Act, even with its recent minor changes under the so-called USA Freedom Act, remains an obscenity, a blatant violation of the Constitution in letter and spirit. Reform is not enough. It must be abolished. From Imprisoned Nation, this is Mumia Abu Jamal. These commentaries are recorded by Noel Hanrahan of Prison Radio.
Mumia Abu Jamal is an award-winning journalist and a political prisoner, and you can find out more about his case as well as listen to all of his commentaries online at prisonradio.org. This is Uprising. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back to Uprising. I'm Sonali Kolhatkar. There are many creative ways to protest injustice. There's good old-fashioned street demonstrations, sit-ins, die-ins, flash mobs, petitions, and social media campaigns. Well, two American men have been using another approach. Mike Bonano and Andy Bichlbaum, who call themselves the Yes Men, have been impersonating corporate executives and PR people for decades, pulling pranks on the world to draw attention to the issues that matter most to them. Things like environmental degradation and corporate greed, gay rights and climate change, and much more. Having been featured in two earlier documentaries simply called The Yes Men and The Yes Men Fix the World, they're now touring the nation with their third film. It's called The Yes Men Are Revolting. No longer spring chickens, Bichlbaum and Bonano continue their prankster protests while balancing family, relationships, kids, and more. Joining me now is Mike Bonano, one of the Yes Men. Welcome to Uprising.
Thank you so much. It's so nice to be here.
Yeah, I'm sorry I said you were not a spring chicken anymore, but neither am I, and I think that you would probably agree because that's part of what your film tackles. Well, first, let's talk about the fact that this is a third film for the Yes Men. We've had you on our show before to talk about your earlier films. And does this film, sort of broadly speaking, represent a little bit of the evolution of the Yes Men?
Well, yeah, it does. And in fact, this is, I think, the first of our films that actually gets into that. It gets into really what makes us tick and why we do what we do. In fact, you can really watch this film if you haven't watched the other films. And that's, I think, part of the goal is to provide us kind of complete experience that's more personal and more engaging for a viewer.
Now, the film opens with a fake press conference that you had at the DC Press Club pretending to be representatives of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, which was very entertaining. The real Chamber of Commerce spokesperson was not very happy. Can you explain what exactly you did?
Yes, we impersonated the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, held a press conference at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., and there we announced that they were going to do an about-face on their position on climate change. They had been opposing climate legislation, and we announced that they were finally, at long last, in support of the Waxman-Markey bill, which was the climate legislation going through Congress at the time. And people were surprised, but nobody was more surprised than the representative of the Chamber of Commerce himself, who was tipped off about it and came barging into the room, and that's why the scene ends up being so fun to watch.
And it was really interesting to watch the journalists in the room not be able to tell the difference between who was really legitimately the representative. They were so confused. It was your partner, Andy Bichlbaum, posing as the Chamber of Commerce representative, and it seemed like he had the room. I mean, they seemed to believe him over this other person.
Oh yeah, well, he's the guy at the podium. He's wearing a suit too. They're both asking each other for business cards. It's really, hilarious to watch.
Mm-hmm.
And the news stations, the television news had a field day with it later. All the commentators, all the broadcasters talking about whether a business card actually legitimizes your identity or not.
And of course, the point then was that you got a way into the news media to discuss the issue that really mattered, the issue being climate change and the fact that the U.S. Chamber of Commerce has been lobbying so heavily against Congress doing anything about climate change. And that's your real goal, right?
Yeah. We see what we do as basically giving journalists an excuse to write stories that they want to write and or report on things that are important issues, but sometimes they need a news hook of some kind. And, if our actions can provide them with just a little bit of leverage to give that issue coverage, we see it as a net gain.
Now, the Chamber sued you for, quote, commercial identity theft disguised as social activism. And while most people would be frightened at the prospect of being sued, initially you and Andy Bichlbaum were excited because it was the first time you'd been sued for something like this. And I'm shocked. You've been doing this for a long time. No one had ever sued you before for impersonation.
Yeah, it's kind of disappointing for us. we kept, well, I won't say we kept hoping to be sued, but we kept thinking that it would be a good opportunity. Certainly, this lawsuit with the chamber would have been a really interesting opportunity if it had gone to court for us to really ask some deeper questions of the chamber. And we had amazing support from the Electronic Frontier Foundation, our pro bono lawyers who do amazing work defending our rights to this kind of action as a form of political speech. So we were fortunate to be represented, but at the same time, we were disappointed when the chamber decided after 4 years of suing us to withdraw the case.
They decided to withdraw the case. Now, if they hadn't, if they had won, that would have impacted not just yours, but the ability of others to do what you do, which is creative social protest that uses impersonation of executives to not just make fun of them, but to shame them into doing the right thing.
Yeah, I think, and this kind of practice, it isn't legal everywhere in the world, and there's some places where there are no, really laws don't matter. And so we are fortunate to actually be in a place, the US, where we have really good laws protecting this kind of speech. And it's an age-old practice. It's something that dates back, actually, arguably to, the days before there were written laws. The mytho-histories of nearly every culture has these stories of trickster characters that change shape and identities, and sometimes in order to reveal really important truths or reveal really important information that's a reflection of culture. And that is, in a way, what we aspire to do.
Are you calling yourself the court jester?
Not necessarily, because the court jester, had to also, work directly for the king, I think, or the court, and we don't necessarily have to. We're not beholden to those same sorts of rules. If we were on their payroll, it might be different. I wish we were. No, I'm kidding. We have our day jobs.
And I want to ask you about those, but I'm wondering, Mike, does the fact that you are both, let's just say, unremarkable looking white guys, and I mean that in the nicest way possible,
Thank you.
Does that help you in your activism? I mean, I don't think I could pull this off for a person of color or women. Not too often. I mean, eventually it'd become pretty recognizable.
Probably. I mean, I don't know.
And certainly I would be arrested, or someone else might be arrested much more often than you and Andy have.
It's possible, and yet it's also really interesting how sometimes racism or sexism can be used as a tool in this kind of work. In the final action of our film, we work with a guy called Git's Crazy Boy, who's from the tar sands. He's indigenous Canadian, from up near, what now is Fort Mac. And he told us when we went to do this final action, we were infiltrating a Homeland Security conference, and we were going to represent the Department of Energy, and he was going to be from the Bureau of Indian Affairs, of course, doing these impersonations. And he said to us, I can make the audience do anything. And we were like, what do you mean do anything? He said, well, get up and dance or whatever, because people are so racist about Native Americans that they're going to think that whatever I have to say, as long as I couch it within some kind of tradition and religion, they're going to feel obligated to do it because of like a sense of guilt and racism combined. And we're like, yeah, right, Gitz. Good luck with that one. But it turned out to be true. And you'll see in the final scene of our film that he does convince everybody with total bull. I mean, he just invents these stories that convince everybody to get up and dance in the name of renewable energy.
Now, you and your partner, Andy Bichlbaum, also went, the two of you who call yourselves the Yes Men, you also went to Uganda to observe how the Global South and people in the Global South are suffering from the impacts of climate change. And this has been a strong theme in your activism over the years, climate change in particular. And so, of course, people who live in the Global South who didn't contribute to the greenhouse gases that are warming the planet are going to be paying the highest price because they don't have the money to adapt to climate change like the Western world does. What was that trip like? Tell us about the woman that invited you there in the first place.
Right. Well, that trip was kind of amazing. I mean, we went to meet up with a bunch of young people who were working with Action Aid, which is an NGO that's quite large, and there's a U.S. branch, but it's also very big in the UK and Denmark. And it was actually Denmark that actually kind of invited us as part of their training program for young activists. So we went to Uganda, and we were there to talk about climate change, and this amazing woman called Kodili Chandia was our host, and we, of course, worked with her on an action in Copenhagen. And it was really an amazing thing to travel in Uganda, see the impacts of climate change in the northeast of Uganda, where it's very dry, and people really, are having to adapt in a major way. It was also interesting because, Andy is gay, and at the time they were trying to pass this "Kill the Gays" bill in the parliament, and so there was this kind of nervous energy about being there the whole time, and that ends up being an interesting sort of personal scene in the movie. He ended up coming out to our hosts in Uganda, who were surprised, and actually many of them had not even known that they'd met any gay people before. So it's a really interesting scene and kind of unexpected in there.
Yes, I definitely like that as well. I want to actually turn now to our in-studio guest, Laura Nix, who just beat the LA traffic to be here in studio. She's the director, along with Andy Bichlbaum and Mike Bonano, of the film The Yes Men Are Revolting. Welcome to Uprising, Laura.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for joining us. Well, this must have been a wild ride for you to take with the Yes Men. Can you tell us about your journey, how you got involved in this film, and how they managed to convince you to go along with some of these crazy antics?
It's a wild ride, for sure. I've known them a really long time. I went to college with Mike, and so I've known him since he was 18, and I also went to grad school with him, and so I was around when he met Andy, and they first started doing their first pranks. So they started with this group called Art Mark, and or RT Mark, and they were conscripting me and every other person they'd ever met to be a part of it. So I think the first thing I did was they wanted me to be a corporate producer for CNET and go in and interview these executives at a company, and then they used it in part of a prank. And I was kind of hooked. I loved having a fake name and a fake phone number and a fake business card, and that was how it began, and that was in late 90s.
And so the film itself, so you co-directed the film with the two of them. How do you tell the stories of what the Yes Men are doing? Because you have to balance not just the pranksterism, but the fact that they're doing this as a form of activism. At the heart of this film is the commitment that two people have made, and all of their colleagues and friends have made, to drawing attention to some of the worst issues, the most important issues in the world.
That's exactly right. The heart of the film is really about what it means to be an activist and what it means to do that for an extended period of time. Because I think for some people, you might start doing that when you're in college and into your 20s, and then the question comes up of how do you keep going? How do you maintain that energy and that passion for your entire adult life? But that's really what we need to be able to do, is to keep that passion going and keep that hope alive and figure out how to be a voice, some kind of contributing voice to a culture of resistance.
And that's a really great point that I want to pick up with Mike. So you and Andy, and as I'd mentioned this earlier, this is your third film. You guys have been doing this for a long time. And by now you have, I believe, 3 children? Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. I have 3 kids.
Well, congratulations, first of all. And Andy, in the film, describes some of the relationship difficulties he has with his boyfriend, just balancing the activism, the work, and the life. But what has that been like? How, and this is such an important question, broadly speaking, for people in general who take on social activism as an important part of their lives and constantly have to figure out how to balance their personal happiness and, of course, that of their family with the higher calling.
Yeah, well, it can be very, very difficult at times, and so, I think it's just a thing that you have to find your own way with, and find balance with, and figure out what works for you, I still haven't found what works for me, so I keep trying things out and trying to adapt. I think Andy started taking up meditation and a couple of other things that I think are kind of, helping him find that quiet time, that downtime to sort of reassess and regroup and stay healthy.
And burnout is real. The danger of burnout is a very real thing, right?
Yeah, burnout is totally real. I mean, I think after we finished our last film, after we did actions in Copenhagen for that end up being in this film. It was right when we were releasing our last film that you see a bunch of the actions that happened at the beginning of our new film, and we really got tired because we sort of felt frantic about, when you know that that there's a really limited time frame for addressing an issue like climate change, and you're pushing and you're part of a movement and you're doing everything you can, it's very easy to become sort of overcommitted at the detriment to your health. And I think we both experience a certain kind of burnout, and you see it in the film and in our new film. And of course, you also see how we figure out how to regenerate our interest again and enthusiasm by finding more people, by joining a bigger movement.
Right. So, Laura, on the same issue, again, as a filmmaker, how did you choose to not just balance the pranks, the protest form, the creative protest that the Yes Men do, with the actual issues they're working on with their family life?
Well, that was a really important decision to make this time around, because the two first Yes Men films didn't really do that. It really just showed the actions, and you didn't understand anything about what their lives were like on the outside. And I think they're great and they're funny, but it runs the risk of making it feel like what the Yes Men are doing are superhuman. And it's true that what they do is incredibly unique, and it does take a very specific kind of talent to do, because they're brilliant at it. But at the same time, a lot of these actions are much more simple than it looks like, and they're real people, and they also have those doubts, and I think that's universal. We all ask these questions about whether or not what we do in activism is going to ever do anything, if it's ever going to make a change, if it's ever going to have an impact. And I think sometimes there's a kind of impatience about it. And you have to remember, we all have to remember that whatever we do over time is what ends up shifting something. So I wanted to show that this time around. It was really important to me to show that the Yes Men also had doubts, so that when people also feel that, they realize they're not alone. And that even people who do this, like the Yes Men, also have those kinds of doubts. And that's a very real response to facing the scale of the problems that we're looking at right now. It's enormous what we're looking at, what we have to solve. But, when you go to a protest, when you do an action, at the end of the day, you didn't solve racism, you didn't end poverty. But activists are always asked that question. I think it's kind of an unfair question. Well, did you change anything? Like, do you ask a scientist who's researching cancer, well, did you cure cancer today? Well, then why are you still doing it? It's like, it's not really fair in a way to kind of like put it out there like that. These things are incremental. And I remember there's a time that the Yes Men were talking to some people in the civil rights movement, and they were saying that it was on any given day they thought they were failing. They always thought they were failing. And then at the end of it, it was like, then it became clear what had been achieved. But if you'd asked anybody, on the day of Selma, is this working? They would have said no. They didn't think it was. And then it's over time that things start to move.
At a speech that Chris Hedges gave in Los Angeles on Sunday, he said many things, but one thing that particularly stood out at me, he said, "I don't fight fascists because I think I can win. I fight fascists because they're fascists." I'm speaking with Laura Nix in studio. She's the director of the documentary The Yes Men Are Revolting. Also with us is Mike Bonano, one of the Yes Men himself. Before actually we get to our questions, Laura, tell us where our audience can watch the film The Yes Men Are Revolting. It's the sort of third in the trilogy. The first film simply entitled The Yes Men. The second film, The Yes Men Fix the World. This one, The Yes Men Are Revolting, which in and of itself is an interesting title.
Right, it has meaning.
And both in Southern California and in the Bay Area, where we have an audience, and also throughout the country. Where can people catch it?
So we're opening in New York this Friday, June 12th at the IFC Center. And next week in LA, we're doing a premiere screening at Cinefamily on June 18th. And then we're moving to the Arena Cinema on the 19th, and we'll be doing a week run there. And if you go to our website, the yesmenarerevolting.com, and go to watch the film, there's a page that lists all the cities that we're going to, because we're also going to be doing runs in San Francisco, in DC, in Boston, in Seattle. Too many. I think we're going to be in probably 30 cities. Not all happening right away, but over time. So if you go to the yesmenarerevolting.com and you go to watch the film, there's a whole listing there. The other thing is that we just came out on iTunes and all the platforms in VOD yesterday. So the film is available on all digital platforms right now. So if you don't live in one of those cities, you can also be able to get access to it immediately.
I want to turn back to Mike Bonano. The pranks that you and Andy have organized over the years, I recall in particular one of my favorites, the Dow Chemical prank. That might have been perhaps your most high-profile prank, where you basically announced, pretending to be Dow Chemical spokespeople, that you were going to compensate the victims of the Union Carbide disaster, the Bhopal disaster in India, and actually made it into a number of news outlets. So my question to you is, has your method of activism inspired other people to do similar things that we may not be reading about in the mainstream news, but maybe it's having a ripple effect? Do you inspire younger folks to take on this form of activism?
Well, yes, and we hear from them all the time, and in fact, we work with them all the time. In fact, right now, we just got done working with a bunch of people at Funny or Die, who are really good fun to work with, and we're continuing to work with people all over the world. There's a group in Germany we've been working with a lot called the Pen Collective, who they come with a whole legacy of stuff that, of course, people before us have done as well. Whether it's the yippies in the 60s or going back hundreds of years, there are all kinds of people doing these amazing, mischievous projects that are about agitating, about sort of trying to lubricate the wheels, the cogs of democracy a little bit with more information than might otherwise be delivered.
And I want to ask you a similar question that Laura was addressing, which is this sense that, or the question that you likely get a lot, which is, did you achieve anything? Did you make change? And in the COP15 meeting, the conference that you had a fake press conference with your colleague from Uganda, who pretended to be a Uganda representative, I believe you were impersonating a Canadian government spokesperson offering to pay billions of dollars to African countries for climate adaptation. And, of course, that meeting ended without any real progress on climate change. So not only do you have to deal with that disappointment, but probably a lot of people asking you, well, why do you do this if you're not necessarily achieving tangible results immediately?
Well, yeah, and this is the thing, is that you have to look at the long term, what happens in the long term. Most of the things that we have been a part of, that we've done actions around, are things where a movement has succeeded. And we've been a small part of these big movements. For example, combating the neoliberal policies of the World Trade Organization, which is the way we got our start impersonating the WTO. That was part of a big movement in the 90s and early 2000s that really did succeed in derailing much of that agenda, because the least developed countries banded together and started voting against most of those policies. And so, of course, these things rear their heads again and again and again. So now we've got the TPP that we have to block right now. But it's still, they could no longer just use the framework of the WTO, because in the end, the sort of democratic nature of it was a way to take power again. And we do have a lot of these sort of democratic infrastructure out there that we could take over again. We need to kick the money out. There's a lot of things we need to do, but in the long run, most of the big social movements of the last 150 years have won. And so we have to look at that and say, okay, as long as we could keep putting on the pressure, and in the case of Paris, the UN climate negotiations that are coming up this December, it's a bit of a deja vu, because when the Copenhagen Climate Conference was happening in 2009, we thought this is our big chance. But now there's much bigger movement happening, and people are really feeling the effects of climate change. I mean, we're here in LA people are talking about the drought. We have to do something about this, but it's going to require joining the movement. And so everybody has to like do whatever they can. But I'm feeling really hopeful about this.
And so you will be in Paris, you and Andy?
Well, chances are we'll be in Paris. We have to still figure out what we're doing, but we're planning projects for Paris regardless.
And how long does it take you, by the way, to plan projects like the way you've planned from start to finish? There must be a process, and I want to get Laura's input on this as well, this process of what goes into brainstorming the various ideas, what sounds too ridiculous or not ridiculous enough. How do you draw the parameters of each action?
Well, I think that it can take anywhere from, a few hours to a few years to develop and execute a project. It depends on how elaborate it is. Often we take about 4 months from planning to execution. And we have a thing called the Yes Lab, where we work with organizations on a project-by-project basis, training people how to do the kinds of things we do themselves. And then we typically take, 2 to 3 months to carry it out. So it varies, and it depends on how elaborate the action is.
And so many of your actions have reflections online, where you actually have real looking or real sounding domain names for websites, not just of corporations, but even the media, like the Wall Street Journal, where somehow you're acquiring these domain names, you're recreating the web infrastructure so that when the journalists who you're trying to fool do their fact checking, they find online confirmation of what you're doing, and that throws them for an even greater loop. And that's a committed action.
Yeah, and to be fair, we don't feel good about lying to journalists. It's not our end goal. But occasionally, the way we structure our actions, we'll have a fake press release that that would have to be, picked up as news by somebody before it can be revealed as being a hoax. And so, we did start to sometimes decide that we didn't really want to trick any journalists. So a good way to do that is to fake the story, to pretend that it's been picked up. And then it's all good. There's no collateral damage.
And Laura, tell us, I'd like your opinion on this as well. Watching these actions being planned and then carried out, this must be like putting on a staged play.
Yeah, it's true that there is various levels of complexity to them. So, you see in the film that there's this one action that takes place at Occupy Wall Street, and it really was planned in a matter of hours, and it cost maybe like $10-20, and it included like being able to use some cheap suits and pizza boxes and markers, and that was all it took. And then there's other actions that really are like months and months and months in the planning. And the Yes Men have been doing it so long, and they're so good at it, they're a bit blasé sometimes about what goes into actually pulling them off, but they're really quite complex, and it requires every detail and element of the action to be figured out. So when we were, some of the actions I was involved with planning and some not. And the final action of the film, I was very involved in the planning of that. And it's cast down to like every single person that we're bringing. So we're bringing vans of people with us from New York to DC to go pull that off. And it involves, fake business cards and fake phone numbers and fake names, not just for Mike, but for all the people that are communicating with this conference that we're telling that we're bringing a secret person to that I'm not going to tell you right now.
Of course not. People have to watch the film.
I want that to be revealed, but we told them that we were somebody else, very, very famous and important. And then it's down to even like the cameras that we use. Like we shoot with small HD cameras, but sometimes we try and get really big cameras that look like news cameras, so it looks like legitimate press is covering the event. And we cast people who look like journalist news, like network news guys, to be the cameramen. So if they show up and their clothes are too hip, I'm like, change your shirt, get some khaki pants on. You can't look like that because you work for whatever network. So every little piece of it is figured out in advance, and it's quite fun though to be able to work on that. And it's like a big play with people and sets and costumes.
And I should mention you have fake journalists because of course that attracts real journalists. When they see lots of journalists covering something, there's of course course, the mentality of, oh my God, it must be important if I see these folks that are likely my colleagues, even if I don't recognize them, and I better go and join in and see what the fuss is all about. Exactly. So very elaborate hoaxes, and of course, the goal being in many cases ending corporate greed. And I want to thank you, Laura, for being involved in the film and the work of the Yes Men, and Mike Bonano. Thank you to you and Andy for the work that you do, and that's showcased in this new documentary, The Yes Men Are Revolting. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Mike Bonano is the one of the two Yes Men. And actually, Laura, give out that website again where listeners and our viewers can find out how they can watch the documentary.
The YesMenAreRevolting.com. And another important website I want to mention is actionswitchboard.net, which is the new platform that the Yes Men are launching, where you can do your own activism. So it's a way of connecting activists from all over the world to be able to get online, meet each other, and do this kind of work yourself.
Actionswitchboard.net. Excellent. Well, thank you so much and best of luck to you.
Thank you so much.
Laura Nix is the director of The Yes Men Are Revolting, along with my guest Mike Bonano and Andy Bichlbaum, who wasn't able to join us. This is Uprising. Anna Buss is our assistant producer. She's also our technical director today, along with Dan Swerdlove. Christian Beck is our production coordinator. Federico Garcia is our audio engineer. Annie Mendoza is our social media coordinator. Subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Uprising with Sonali. Our website is uprisingwithsonali.com. Our theme music is by Quetzal. I'm Sonali Kolhatkar, host and executive producer of Uprising. I'll see you next time.